The dog was starving, but somehow, it looked more afraid of the sheriff than death itself. Rain came sideways in Gray Harbor, Oregon. Not the soft kind either. Cold rain. Heavy rain. The kind that carried salt from the ocean and slipped beneath jackets no matter how hard somebody tried pretending they did not feel it. Mason Reeves parked his old black pickup beside a roadside diner that looked like it had stopped hoping sometime around 1987. Neon sign flickering weakly above cracked windows. Half the parking lot empty. The town itself barely breathing. Gray Harbor sat between dark pine forests and rough Pacific water, quiet enough to make loneliness feel louder. Mason liked that at first. 44 years old. White-skinned. Former Navy SEAL. Divorced. Burned out. Tired in ways sleep never really fixed anymore. 3 months earlier, he packed whatever still mattered into his truck and drove north without much of a plan besides disappearing quietly. No drama. No speeches. Just distance. Some people called it starting over. Mason privately called it surviving disappointment. Rain tapped against the windshield while he sat motionless outside the diner, holding cold coffee he forgot to drink. Evening settled early here. Too early. Clouds heavy enough to swallow daylight whole. Somewhere in the distance, foghorns drifted across the harbor. Long hollow. Lonely. Gray Harbor had that feeling. Like something sad happened years ago, and nobody bothered cleaning it up properly. Mason stepped out finally. Wind pushed rain against his jacket immediately. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and fryer grease the second he walked inside. Warm, at least. Older waitress behind the counter barely looked up. "You knew?" she asked without smiling. "Guess so. Town keeps track." She slid a menu toward him without asking if he wanted one. "Soup is decent." Mason sat near the window. Habit. Always watch exits. Old training never fully leaves. The place stayed mostly quiet except for 2 fishermen arguing softly near the coffee machine and an older couple eating pie without speaking. Strange town. Strange silence. Nobody seemed rude exactly. Just careful. Like conversations had rules nobody explained. 30 minutes later, Mason stepped back outside carrying leftovers he never planned to finish. Rain heavier now. Parking lot nearly empty except for an old sheriff cruiser parked near the side road. Sheriff inside talking to somebody near the diner entrance. Mason barely noticed at first. Then came the sound. Soft. Low. Not quite a growl. More like warning wrapped in exhaustion. He turned instinctively. Near the edge of the property behind an overturned dumpster sat a German shepherd. Thin enough to hurt just looking at him. Sable black and tan coat, soaked through. Mud tangled deep into fur. One ear nicked slightly. Amber eyes sharp despite hunger. Watching. Waiting. Not begging. Just surviving. Mason crouched automatically without thinking. "Hey, buddy." The dog did not move. Rain dripped from rusted metal nearby. Wind shifted hard enough to carry ocean salt across the empty lot. Mason opened the leftover diner container slowly. Turkey sandwich. Fries nobody should feel guilty throwing away. "You hungry?" The dog glanced briefly toward the food, then immediately looked somewhere else. Not at Mason. At the sheriff cruiser. Body stiffening instantly. Quiet growl again. Fear. Real fear. Mason frowned. Strange reaction. The cruiser door shut. Sheriff laughed at something somebody said. The dog immediately backed farther into shadow near the woods. Ears pinned. Tense. Not aggression. Panic. Mason stayed still. "Okay," he muttered quietly. "That is weird." Because starving dogs usually moved toward food. Fear came second. Survival came first. But not this one. This dog looked more afraid of being seen than starving. Sheriff vehicle slowly pulled across the parking lot. Headlights sweeping briefly through rain. The dog lowered instantly, almost disappearing into shadow. Waiting. Watching. Not breathing easy until the cruiser finally turned toward Main Street and disappeared into darkness. Only then did the German shepherd slowly step forward. Careful. Exhausted. Cautious beyond reason. Mason slid the sandwich closer. "Guess we both got trust issues." The dog hesitated, then ate too fast. Too hungry. Like meals had become uncertain lately. Mason noticed ribs immediately beneath wet fur. Collar marks too. Recent enough not to belong months ago. Somebody owned him once. Somebody left him anyway. Rain moved harder now. Wind colder. Mason stood slowly and opened the truck door. "Come on." No movement. "You are not sleeping out here." The dog backed away immediately. Toward the woods instead. Stopped. Looked back once. Then again. Strange pause. Waiting almost. Like he wanted Mason to follow. Mason frowned deeper. What are you doing? The German Shepherd moved toward the dark tree line bordering the diner property. Stopped again. Looking back once more. Urgent now somehow. Rain falling harder between them. Ocean wind pushing through pine branches overhead. Then headlights suddenly appeared again. Sheriff Cruiser returning unexpectedly from the far road. The dog panicked immediately. Full body tension. Fear sharper now. He turned fast toward the woods, then stopped just long enough to look directly at Mason one last time before disappearing into darkness. And somehow, standing alone in cold rain beside a dying diner sign, Mason suddenly felt something he had not expected. The strange, uncomfortable feeling that the dog had not been running away from him. It had been trying to warn him. The dog should have disappeared into the woods and never looked back. That would have made sense. Stray dogs survived by disappearing. Trust cost too much when survival already hurt. But sometime after midnight, while cold Pacific rain hammered against Mason Reeves's cabin windows, something strange happened. A sound, soft at first, barely there beneath the wind. Scratch. Pause. Scratch again. Mason opened one eye slowly. Years of military training taught him to wake fully before moving. Small rental cabin near the harbor. Quiet road. No neighbors close enough to explain footsteps. Rain moving sideways against glass. Clock glowing 2:17 in the morning. Another scratch came. Front porch. Mason sat up immediately. No panic. Just habit. He grabbed the flashlight beside the bed and moved carefully through the dark house. Floorboards creaked softly beneath heavy steps. Outside, wind pushed through pine trees hard enough to sound like whispers brushing the roof. Another scratch. Longer this time. Mason unlocked the front door slowly. Cold air rushed inside immediately, carrying rain and ocean salt. Then he saw him, the German Shepherd from the diner, standing completely soaked beneath the porch light. Thin body shaking slightly. Mud covering paws. Amber eyes alert even through exhaustion. The dog did not bark. Did not beg. Just stood there watching Mason like he had arrived for a reason. Mason exhaled quietly. You have got to be kidding me. The dog lowered his head slightly, but never moved closer. Careful still. Distrust living somewhere deep beneath those tired eyes. Mason crouched slowly. You followed me. Rain dripped from the porch roof between them. Somewhere in the distance, foghorns echoed softly over dark harbor water. The dog glanced once toward the tree line near the road. Nervous. Watching. Then back to Mason again. Strange behavior. Not random. Like fear followed him here. Mason stepped aside from the doorway. Come inside. No movement. Look, I am not arguing with a freezing dog at 2 in the morning. Still nothing. The dog hesitated before finally stepping one paw forward. Then stopped again. Mason noticed something immediately. Every time headlights passed faintly along the distant road, the dog tensed. Full body alert. Fear. Real fear. Okay. Mason muttered quietly. Somebody really messed you up. Eventually hunger won the argument. Mason grabbed leftover turkey from the refrigerator and set it near an old blanket beside the heater. The German Shepherd ate carefully this time. Not frantic like before. Still cautious though. Watching exits. Watching windows. Watching Mason too. Like safety remained temporary. Mason leaned quietly against the kitchen counter, holding cold coffee he reheated without wanting. Funny thing about lonely houses was how alive they suddenly felt when somebody else occupied the silence. The dog finished eating, then curled carefully near the front door instead of the blanket. Guarding position. Strange choice for an abandoned animal. Mason frowned. You know there is a perfectly good spot over there, right? No reaction. Just watchful silence. Like protecting doors mattered more than comfort. Morning arrived gray and wet. Gray Harbor looked even smaller beneath low clouds and cold mist rolling off the ocean. Fishing boats drifted quietly near harbor docks while gulls argued somewhere above rusted rooftops. Mason stopped at the local hardware store for dog food and a cheap collar mostly, because pretending otherwise felt ridiculous now. Older cashier barely smiled. New dog. Mason hesitated. Maybe. The woman looked strangely uncomfortable. Careful keeping strays around here. Mason frowned slightly. Why? Small pause. Some things wander for reasons. Then silence. No explanation. Just awkward quiet. Strange town. Strange people. If you are enjoying the mystery so far and believe every abandoned soul deserves a second chance, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss what this dog is trying so desperately to reveal. Back at the cabin, the German Shepherd waited exactly where Mason left him. Calm but alert, still near the door, watching woods through the front window like something out there mattered. Mason filled food and water bowls. Guess I should call you something. The dog looked briefly toward him. Bandit. Nothing. Too dramatic. Small pause. Mason noticed dark muddy paw prints near the back porch. Fresh. Strange. Because the dog had been inside all morning. He followed the prints outside. Wet ground. Pine needles. Mud leading toward the woods behind the cabin. Then stopping. Not random stopping. Waiting. The German Shepherd stood suddenly beside him. Tense again now. Looking toward the trees. Tail low. Ears raised. Watching. Then slowly stepped forward before stopping again and looking back at Mason. Same behavior from last night near the diner. Follow me. Rain started lightly again. Wind moving colder through dark branches overhead. Mason narrowed his eyes toward the woods. What exactly are you trying to show me? The dog took another step forward. Hesitated. Looked back again. Somewhere deep in the trees, something metallic clanged softly against wind. And for reasons Mason could not explain yet, the whole town suddenly felt like it was quietly holding its breath. The dog did not sleep much. Mason Reeves noticed that first. Every few hours during the night, he woke to the sound of claws shifting quietly across hardwood floors near the front door. Not pacing exactly. Guarding. Watching. Waiting. Like danger had learned the house address already. Gray Harbor woke slowly beneath another cold Oregon morning wrapped in low fog and ocean wind. Fishing boats drifted through harbor mist like ghosts unsure where daylight started. Pine trees swayed heavily beyond the cabin while gulls screamed over rooftops for reasons nobody understood. Mason stood near the kitchen window holding black coffee, watching the German Shepherd sit perfectly still beside the back porch. Alert. Always alert. No barking. No playful curiosity. Just eyes fixed toward the tree line behind the property. Waiting for something. Or somebody. You planning to explain yourself anytime soon? Mason muttered quietly. The dog glanced back briefly, then returned attention toward the woods immediately. Strange animal. Smart animal too. Too smart. Most abandoned dogs slowly relaxed once food and warmth arrived. This one seemed uncomfortable with safety. Like resting came with consequences. Mason grabbed an old rain jacket and finally clipped a cheap leash onto the collar he bought yesterday. All right, he sighed. You keep asking me to follow you. Let us see what is so important. The German Shepherd froze instantly when Mason reached toward the leash. Not fear exactly. More hesitation. Like somebody once taught him rules he no longer trusted. Then slowly, cautiously, he stepped forward anyway. Outside, the cold hit immediately. Wet pine smell hanging heavy beneath gray sky, while distant waves rolled quietly somewhere beyond town. Mud covered the narrow trail behind Mason's cabin. Fresh paw prints already visible from earlier. Same trail. Same direction. Toward deeper woods. The dog moved ahead naturally. Not pulling. Leading. Every few feet, he stopped just long enough to glance back and make sure Mason still followed. Deliberate behavior. Intentional. Almost military. Mason frowned quietly. You definitely belong to somebody. They walked nearly half a mile through damp forest where silence settled strangely thick between trees. No birds. No hikers. Just wind brushing branches overhead and occasional sounds of distant water somewhere deeper in the valley. Then came something strange. An old logging road. Half swallowed by weeds now. Rusted warning signs leaning sideways. The German Shepherd stopped instantly. Tense posture returning. Ears raised. Watching the road ahead like memory itself waited there. Mason crouched slightly. You know this place? No movement. But the dog stepped forward again slowly. Careful now. Protective somehow. Like whatever sat ahead mattered. 15 minutes later, the trees opened suddenly. Mason stopped. Small abandoned cabin near the edge of a clearing. Weather-beaten wood. Broken porch railing. Windows dirty enough to hide darkness inside. Roof sagging slightly beneath years of neglect. Yet something felt wrong immediately. Too quiet. Too untouched. Like abandonment happened recently enough for the place to still remember people. The German Shepherd walked directly toward the cabin, but stopped near the front steps. Refused to go farther. Watching Mason instead. Waiting. Mason narrowed his eyes. No chance this is normal. Front door partly open. Wind moving it slightly. Slow creak. Slow silence. Mason stepped carefully inside. Old military instincts returning automatically. Scan corners. Windows. Exits. Dust covered most surfaces, but not evenly. Recent disturbance near the fireplace. Muddy footprints. Fresh enough not to belong months ago. Mason's chest tightened slightly. Somebody had been here. Recently. On a broken table sat old newspapers stacked carelessly. Missing person notices. Multiple faces. Different years. Same town. Gray Harbor. Mason frowned harder. What the hell? Then something caught his eye near the wall. Family photographs scattered partly beneath overturned boxes. Smiling people near fishing docks. Children. Birthdays. Ordinary lives. Yet almost every photo had one strange detail. The same German shepherd appeared repeatedly in backgrounds. Younger. Healthier. Standing beside different people. Mason slowly turned toward the dog outside. You were here. Wind moved harder against cabin walls suddenly. Then came another sound. Engine. Faint at first. Vehicle somewhere outside the clearing. Mason stepped quickly toward the dirty front window. Dark sheriff cruiser parked farther down the old logging road. Too far to see clearly, but close enough to feel wrong. Very wrong. The German shepherd lowered immediately beside the porch. Full body tension. Fear sharper than before. Watching the cruiser without blinking. Mason's stomach tightened quietly. Because now the reaction made less sense than ever. Why would a starving abandoned dog know an old hidden cabin? Why did he appear in missing family photos? And why, every single time the sheriff got close, did the dog look terrified enough to disappear? Somewhere beyond the trees, a car door quietly shut. And for the first time since arriving in Gray Harbor, Mason realized something unsettling. The dog had not been wandering. It had been trying to bring him here all along. The sheriff should have surprised him, but somehow he did not. Mason Reeves stood motionless inside the abandoned cabin while cold wind slipped through broken window frames carrying the smell of wet pine and ocean salt. Outside, somewhere beyond the clearing, the sheriff cruiser sat quietly near the old logging road like it had been expected all along. The German shepherd remained frozen near the porch. Full body alert. Ears lowered slightly. Not aggressive. Fearful. Real fear. The kind fear somebody learns through experience. Mason crouched near the dusty window and watched carefully through cracked glass. Sheriff vehicle. Engine still running. Driver door opening slowly. A tall man stepped out adjusting his rain jacket against the wind. Sheriff Dalton Pierce. Late 50s maybe. Gray Harbor born and raised if rumors around town meant anything. Broad shoulders softened by age. Calm face. Too calm. Mason noticed something immediately. The sheriff looked directly toward the cabin like he already knew exactly what sat inside. Like surprises stopped surprising him years ago. You really do not like this guy, Mason muttered quietly toward the dog. The German shepherd did not move. Just watched. Muscles tight. Tail low. Waiting. Sheriff Pierce approached slowly through wet grass. No urgency. No concern. Comfortable. That bothered Mason more than anything. Because normal people reacted differently to abandoned cabins deep in the woods, filled with missing person notices and strange photographs. Comfortable people already knew the story. Knock. Soft. Deliberate. Anybody in there? Sheriff Pierce called through the doorway. Calm voice. Friendly voice. The kind people trusted too easily. Mason stepped outside carefully. Rain had slowed to mist now. Gray clouds hanging low above the trees while silence settled strangely heavy between branches. Afternoon, Mason said evenly. Sheriff smiled politely. Mr. Reeves. Small pause. Town moves quick. Town sure seems interested in my business. Sheriff chuckled softly. Small places. Then his eyes shifted briefly toward the dog. Tiny pause. Too quick for most people to notice. But Mason noticed. Recognition. Familiarity. Then gone. That your dog? Sheriff asked casually. The German shepherd immediately stepped backward toward the porch shadows. Tense. Watching. Mason frowned slightly. Found him near the diner. Sheriff nodded too fast. Strays wander around sometimes. Lie. Small lie. But enough. Because Mason saw it. The dog saw it too. Same fear. Same tension. Same reaction every single time the sheriff appeared. Mason folded his arms quietly. Funny thing. Pause. He acts terrified every time your car shows up. Sheriff's smile shifted almost invisibly. Still friendly. Slightly colder now. Animals act strange. Mason looked toward the cabin behind him, especially around places with missing person flyers. Silence. Brief silence. Wind brushing branches overhead. Sheriff exhaled quietly. Old drifters stayed here years back. Easy answer. Prepared answer. Too prepared. Nothing worth bothering over. Mason glanced once toward the photographs inside. Family pictures. Children. Same dog, younger in every frame. Did the drifters own him? Sheriff hesitated half a second too long. Could not tell you. Another lie. Tiny crack. Tiny reveal. Because now Mason felt it clearly. Sheriff recognized the dog. Sheriff knew the cabin. Sheriff just did not expect somebody to ask questions. The German Shepherd moved suddenly then. Quiet whine. Low. Urgent. Looking toward the backside of the property. Not Sheriff. Woods. Like something else mattered more. Mason noticed immediately. What is it? Sheriff followed his gaze briefly. Calm again. Too calm. Look, Sheriff said casually, hands inside jacket pockets. Gray Harbor is quiet. Folks like it that way. Small pause. Probably best not go digging around old places chasing stories. There it was. Not advice. Warning. Wrapped politely enough to sound neighborly. Mason held eye contact longer than necessary. Years in special operations taught him something useful. Real threats usually smiled first. Appreciate the concern, Mason said quietly. Sheriff smiled again. Just trying to help. Then another strange thing happened. The German Shepherd suddenly barked once. Sharp. Loud enough to cut straight through the clearing. First bark Mason heard since finding him. Immediate reaction. Sheriff stiffened. Tiny movement. Barely there. But fear flashed briefly across his face before disappearing. Fear. Not annoyance. Not surprise. Fear. Then gone again. Mason noticed. So did the dog. Sheriff cleared his throat lightly. You take care now. Calm smile again. Perfect smile. He turned back toward the cruiser without rushing. But something felt different now. Like the conversation changed shape somehow. Like both men quietly realized the other noticed too much. The German Shepherd stayed frozen until the cruiser disappeared back through the logging road. Only then did tension slowly leave his body. Mason crouched beside him carefully. Okay. Quiet voice now. You definitely know something. The dog looked toward the back of the cabin again. Same urgency. Same focus. Mason followed his line of sight toward a half-collapsed woodshed hidden behind thick brush. Something metallic hanging slightly open near the doorway. Wind pushed softly through broken wood. Strange feelings settled deep in Mason's chest again. Because somehow it felt like the cabin had only been the beginning. Sometimes trust breaks louder in silence than it ever does in storms. Mason Reeves stood near the broken woodshed behind the abandoned cabin while cold Oregon wind moved slowly through pine branches overhead. Rain had stopped for now, leaving only damp earth and the distant sound of harbor foghorns drifting somewhere beyond the hills. The German Shepherd stood several feet ahead, alert again, focused, watching the half-open woodshed door like memory itself waited behind it. Mason moved carefully closer. Something about the place felt untouched and disturbed at the same time. Rusted lock hanging broken. Fresh mud near the entrance. Not old mud either. Recent. Somebody had been here. Recently enough to leave tracks before yesterday's rain fully settled. You keep leading me to strange places, Mason muttered quietly. The dog glanced back once, then lowered his head near the doorway. Waiting. Inside smelled like damp wood and old metal. Shelves collapsing. Gardening tools long forgotten. Rotting boxes near one wall. Nothing obvious. Nothing dramatic. But Mason noticed something strange near the back corner. Floorboards slightly uneven. Newer than everything around them. Wrong color. Wrong texture. Somebody repaired part of the floor years after everything else stopped matching. Mason crouched. Pressed lightly. Hollow sound beneath. His jaw tightened. Well, he whispered softly. That is never good. Before he could investigate further, the German Shepherd suddenly stiffened. Full body alert again. Not fear this time. Listening. Mason heard it too. Vehicle engine. Closer than before. He moved quickly toward the doorway. Not sheriff cruiser this time. Old pickup trucks slowing near the logging road. A middle-aged man stepped out carrying fishing gear, stopping abruptly when he noticed Mason near the property. Small pause. Awkward pause. Did not expect anyone up here. the man said carefully. Friendly enough voice. Nervous eyes. Mason nodded once. Just exploring. The man looked briefly toward the dog. Immediate discomfort crossing his face before disappearing. Too fast for most people to notice. Mason noticed anyway. That dog yours? The man asked. Found him. Another pause. Longer now. Wind brushing pine needles overhead. You ought to leave this place alone, the man said quietly. Nothing good comes from old stories in Gray Harbor. Mason folded his arms. Funny. Everybody keeps saying things like that. The man looked toward the woods uneasily. People disappear here sometimes. Small silence. Not officially. Then he climbed back into his truck without another word. Gone almost immediately. Too quick. Too rehearsed. Mason stood motionless watching taillights disappear between trees. The German shepherd moved beside him quietly. Calm but tense. Like warnings meant something. Like time mattered. Back at the cabin later that evening, Gray Harbor felt colder than usual. Streets quieter. Harbor emptier. Even the diner looked darker somehow. Mason stopped at the grocery store for supplies and noticed conversations lowering when he entered. Eyes lingering too long. Smiles too careful. Like the whole town somehow knew where he had been. At checkout, old cashier avoided eye contact entirely. People talk, she muttered softly while scanning coffee. Mason frowned. About what? She hesitated. You should stop asking questions. Then nothing. No explanation. Just silence. Again. That same strange silence everybody here seemed trained to wear. Night arrived heavy and gray. Rain threatening again. Mason sat at the kitchen table reviewing photographs he quietly took at the cabin earlier. Missing person notices. Old family images. Newspaper clippings too faded to fully read. Same dog appearing again and again beside different people. Children smiling beside him. Older couple near fishing docks. Birthday cake in another picture. Ordinary lives. Until suddenly, nothing. Missing. Forgotten. Erased. The German shepherd lay near the front door watching shadows move outside. Uneasy. Mason finally looked over. You belong to somebody. Quiet pause. Did they disappear too? No answer, of course. Just tired amber eyes reflecting firelight softly. Then something strange happened. Around midnight, Mason woke suddenly. Too quiet. No claws near the door. No movement. Silence. Wrong silence. He sat up immediately. Front room empty. Dog gone. Front door slightly open. Cold wind slipping inside. Mason's stomach dropped hard. No, he grabbed flashlight fast. Jacket. Keys. Porch empty. Rain beginning again. Fresh paw prints disappearing into darkness toward the woods. But not alone. Tire tracks too. Fresh. Very fresh. Deep and wet dirt near the road. Mason crouched slowly. Something folded beneath the porch step caught his attention. Small dirty piece of paper. Wet from rain. Trembling slightly in cold wind. Mason unfolded it carefully beneath porch light. Only 4 words written unevenly across the page. Leave town. Or leave him. And standing alone in cold midnight rain, Mason suddenly realized something terrifying. Somebody else knew about the dog. Sometimes the thing that hurts most is not losing trust. It is realizing somebody stole it before you ever had the chance to protect it. Mason Reeves barely slept. Rain tapped softly against cabin windows while the note sat folded on the kitchen table beside cold coffee he forgot to drink. Leave town. Or leave him. 4 words. Simple. Quiet. Mean enough to work. But Mason had spent too many years in places where fear arrived disguised as advice. Somebody wanted him gone. Worse, somebody wanted the dog gone too. And somehow, that frightened him more. Dawn arrived pale and gray across Gray Harbor. Ocean fog drifting low through empty streets while fishing boats moved silently beyond the docks like shadows carrying secrets. Mason stood on the porch staring at muddy tire tracks still pressed into wet dirt. Fresh enough to matter. Deliberate enough to mean something. The German shepherd had not simply wandered off. Not after weeks of cautious trust. Not after sleeping beside the front door every night like safety finally meant something. Something happened. Or somebody made sure something happened. Mason drove straight back toward the abandoned cabin by mid-morning. Same logging road. Same cold forest. Pine branches heavy with rain overhead. Quiet so thick it felt unnatural. He parked farther back this time. Walking instead. Listening. Watching. Old habits returning without permission. The cabin sat exactly where he left it. Empty. Wind moving gently through broken wood. But something had changed. Front door partly open wider than before. Fresh boot marks in mud. More than one set now. Mason's jaw tightened. You really do not want me here. Inside, dust had shifted. Boxes overturned. Newspaper clippings missing. Somebody searched the place. Recently. Fast. Nervous. Near the fireplace, something caught Mason's eye. Small scratch marks against wood flooring. New scratches. Dog scratches. Like somebody resisted leaving. His chest tightened quietly. Bandit. Silence answered. Then movement. Faint sound outside behind the cabin. Mason turned instantly. Not fear. Instinct. Near the woodshed, half hidden beneath wet brush, sat the German shepherd. Alive. Thin body trembling slightly. Mud clinging to fur. Amber eyes exhausted. But alive. Mason exhaled hard enough to almost laugh. You stubborn idiot. The dog stood slowly but did not come immediately. Strange hesitation now. Fear sitting heavier than before. Like trust had been shaken overnight. Mason crouched low. Calm voice. Patient voice. Come here. Wind moved softly between them. Long pause. Then finally, slow careful steps. One paw at a time. Until the German shepherd stood close enough for Mason to see something tied loosely beneath his collar. Small plastic pouch. Hidden deliberately. Mason frowned immediately. What is this? Inside sat old folded documents wrapped carefully against water damage. Property maps. Land ownership records. Names circled repeatedly in faded red ink. Dates stretching back nearly 15 years. And something else. Missing resident reports quietly marked inactive. Same last names appearing beside expensive waterfront property acquisitions. Mason stared longer than necessary. Pieces shifting slowly together. Families disappear. Property changes ownership. Town moves on quietly. Nobody asks questions. Cold realization settled into his stomach. This was not random corruption. This was organized silence. The German shepherd nudged Mason's arm lightly. Small movement. Tired movement. Like his job was finally halfway done. Mason looked down. You knew? Quiet pause. You have been trying to show somebody. The dog lowered carefully beside him. Exhausted. Still watching woods nervously. Then came another sound. Vehicle. Distant at first. Closer than comfortable. Mason stood immediately. Sheriff cruiser. Far down the logging road. Slow approach. Too slow. Like somebody expected to find something. Or somebody. Mason looked at the dog. Then documents. Then road. Choice arriving faster than expected. Stay visible and lose advantage. Or disappear long enough to understand the truth. He grabbed everything quickly. Come on. The German shepherd followed instantly this time. No hesitation anymore. No distance. Straight beside him through trees while rain began falling again in soft, cold waves across the forest. Nearly 20 minutes later, they stopped near an abandoned sawmill overlooking the harbor cliffs. Broken machinery rusted beneath fog. Forgotten place. Hidden place. Mason crouched beneath partial cover studying papers more carefully. Same names repeating. Sheriff Department signatures. Quiet property transfers after disappearances. One final folded document slipped loose near the bottom. Handwritten sentence. Short enough to chill him immediately. If anyone finds this, trust the dog. They know what happened to us. Mason looked slowly toward the German shepherd now lying quietly beside him beneath the old sawmill roof. Exhausted. Loyal. Watching the rain. Suddenly one thing became painfully clear. The dog had never been lost. He had been carrying somebody's last attempt at telling the truth. Sometimes betrayal hurts more when it arrives wearing a familiar face. Rain continued through most of the afternoon, while Mason Reeves stayed hidden inside the abandoned sawmill overlooking Gray Harbor. Rusted steel beams groaned softly above him whenever ocean wind pushed hard enough through broken walls. The German shepherd rested nearby beneath an old tarp-covered section of concrete, finally asleep for the first time in days. Exhaustion softened him. Even in sleep, one ear stayed alert. Like trust never fully allowed rest anymore. Mason sat against an old crate reading through the hidden documents again and again. Property transfers. Missing resident reports quietly closed without explanation. Family names erased from public records. Entire waterfront sections changing ownership shortly after disappearances. Same signatures appearing repeatedly. Sheriff Department approval. County authorization. Quiet legal language hiding ugly truths beneath polite paperwork. Gray Harbor had not simply lost people. Somebody benefited every time somebody vanished. Wind carried harbor fog deeper through the broken structure. Somewhere below, waves crashed softly against rock cliffs. Mason rubbed tired eyes and looked toward the sleeping dog again. You carried this alone? Quiet pause. For how long? The German shepherd stirred slightly at the sound of his voice, but stayed resting. Safe enough now. Maybe for the first time in years. By evening, hunger forced Mason into town. Risky decision. Necessary decision. Gray Harbor looked smaller beneath rain-soaked streetlights. Quiet harbor businesses closing early. Windows glowing softly through fog while people moved faster than necessary, avoiding eye contact the way nervous towns sometimes do when secrets grow too heavy. Mason stopped at the diner again mostly because normal routines sometimes hid trouble better than fear did. Same older waitress behind the counter. Same weak coffee smell. Same uncomfortable silence when he walked inside. You look tired, she muttered quietly while refilling coffee nobody asked for. Mason shrugged slightly. Strange week. She hesitated. Long enough to matter. You should stop asking questions. There it was again. Everybody warned. Nobody explained. Mason leaned back carefully. Funny thing, he said quietly. Nobody ever tells me what happens if I do not. The waitress looked toward the front window nervously. Sheriff cruiser parked across the street. Lights off. Watching. Her voice lowered immediately. People disappear. Small pause. And folks around here learn not to notice. Mason studied her carefully. Fear. Real fear. The kind that settles into people after years of silence. Before he could ask more, bell above diner door rang softly. Sheriff Dalton Pierce entered. Calm smile already prepared. Friendly as always. Too friendly. Mr. Reeves, Sheriff said casually. Mind if I join you? Mason nodded once. Free country. Sheriff sat across from him. Rain sliding slowly down diner windows between them. Soft country music playing faintly overhead. Ordinary setting. Wrong feeling. Heard you have been wandering old properties, Sheriff said lightly. Bad weather for hiking. Mason stirred untouched coffee slowly. Funny town for abandoned places. Sheriff smiled politely. People move away. Without paperwork. Small silence. Sheriff leaned back slightly. Smile thinner now. You used to military? Still am in certain ways. Then you know when to leave bad situations alone. There it was. Not threat exactly. Something quieter. Colder. Mason held eye contact. What if somebody left something important behind? Sheriff's face changed almost invisibly. Tiny pause. Tiny calculation. Some things stay buried for good reasons. Then something unexpected happened. Near the diner entrance came scratching against glass. Soft. Familiar. Mason turned instantly. The German shepherd stood outside in rain beneath flickering neon light. Soaked again. Watching him through the window. Alive. Safe. Relief hit harder than expected. But not alone. Behind the dog stood an older man Mason recognized vaguely from the harbor docks. Mr. Franklin Tate. Retired fisherman. Quiet guy. Avoided conversations. Sheriff saw him too. Immediate tension. Tiny flash of irritation crossing his face before disappearing. Strange. Very strange. Mason stood slowly. Looks like somebody found me. Sheriff's smile returned instantly. Careful who you trust in Gray Harbor. Mason stopped near the door. Funny, he said quietly. Was just thinking the same thing. Outside. Cold rain moved hard beneath yellow parking lot lights while the German shepherd pressed briefly against Mason's leg like reassurance finally mattered. Mr. Tate lowered his voice immediately. Nervous eyes scanning empty street. You found the cabin, did you not? Mason said nothing. Did not need to. The older man exhaled shakily. Then you need to know something. Small pause. The sheriff is not the only one involved. Wind moved hard across the harbor then. Rain colder somehow. He looked toward the dog. Then back at Mason. And if that dog brought you this far? Another pause, quieter now. He remembers something nobody else survived long enough to tell. Truth rarely arrives loudly. Sometimes it limps through rain beside a starving dog and waits for somebody stubborn enough to notice. Mason Reeves stood beneath the flickering diner sign while cold Oregon rain slipped down his jacket collar and pooled quietly around worn boots. The German shepherd stayed pressed lightly against his leg now. Not hiding anymore. Not running. Watching. Always watching. Mr. Franklin Tate kept glancing toward empty streets like fear had memorized his habits years ago. Harbor lights shimmered weakly through fog drifting across town, while distant fishing boats moved silently offshore. Not here, Mr. Tate muttered quietly. Too many eyes. Mason nodded once. No argument. 10 minutes later they sat inside an old boathouse near the harbor edge. Small place. Smelled like salt, engine oil, and old cedar left too long near ocean wind. Rain tapped softly against rusted metal roof while lantern light flickered across old fishing equipment stacked against walls. The German shepherd lay near the door, calm but alert, watching every sound, every movement. Protective instinct settling naturally now beside Mason like trust had quietly decided where it belonged. Mr. Tate stood near an old workbench rubbing tired hands together. 70 maybe. Weathered face. Eyes carrying years of things better left unsaid. That dog, he said softly, looking toward the German shepherd, used to belong to the Harper family. Mason frowned slightly. The people from the photographs. Small nod. Good people. Owned land near the harbor before developers came around. Rain moved harder outside. Wind pushing softly against walls. Mr. Tate lowered his voice further. Years back, families started disappearing. Quiet disappearances. No bodies. No investigations that went anywhere. Small pause. People asked questions at first. Another pause. Longer this time. Then people stopped. Mason leaned back quietly. Because of the sheriff? Mr. Tate hesitated. Not only him. He reached toward an old filing cabinet and pulled out folded newspaper clippings. Same names from the cabin. Same missing residents. But handwritten notes appeared beside several articles. Land sold. Property reassigned. Family gone. Mason's stomach tightened again. Pattern now impossible to ignore. The Harpers fought back, Mr. Tate continued quietly. Refused to sell their waterfront land. His eyes shifted toward the dog. Then one winter, they disappeared. Silence settled heavily around the room. The German shepherd lifted his head slowly at the sound of the family name. Listening. Remembering somehow. Mr. Tate exhaled shakily. Dog vanished too. Pause. Until now. Mason looked down toward him carefully. Thin body finally healthier than before. Amber eyes quieter these days. But sadness still lived there. Waiting. So he stayed alive carrying evidence. Mr. Tate nodded slowly. Somebody hid documents on him before everything happened. Then came another pause. Smaller. Harder somehow. You need to understand something. Mason looked up. What? Mr. Tate swallowed carefully. Sheriff Pierce is not running this. Wind rattled the harbor windows suddenly. Then who is? The older man looked toward the waterfront through rain-streaked glass. Expensive homes standing higher along cliffs overlooking town. Warm lights glowing behind giant windows. Quiet power. Hidden money. Town council, Mr. Tate said softly. Property investors. Harbor authority people. Small pause. Folks who got rich after families disappeared. Mason stared quietly for a long second. Bigger than expected. Much bigger. Years of silence. Years of corruption buried beneath polite smiles and small-town routines. Suddenly the diner warnings made sense. The fear. The careful eyes. Everybody knew something. Nobody knew who still listened. The German shepherd stood suddenly near the door. Alert again. Ears raised. Watching outside. Mason noticed immediately. What is it? Then headlights swept briefly across boathouse windows. Slow movement. Stopping nearby. Vehicle engine idling outside. Wrong time. Wrong place. Mr. Tate went pale immediately. No, he whispered softly. They know. Mason stood calmly. Military calm. Controlled breathing. Fear later. Decisions now. Through rain-streaked window sat dark SUV near harbor entrance. No police markings. No obvious reason to be there. Just waiting. Watching. The German shepherd moved closer beside Mason instantly. Shoulder touching his leg. Quiet loyalty. Quiet warning. Mason crouched briefly beside him. You knew this would happen, huh? The dog stayed still. Watching the door. Ready. Not afraid anymore. Protective now. Like trust finally outweighed fear. Mr. Tate shook slightly near the back wall. You should leave town. Same warning again. Different voice. Mason looked toward harbor lights beyond the rain. Quiet town pretending nothing happened. Families erased. Homes stolen. Truth buried beneath paperwork and silence. Then looked back toward the dog. Somebody abandoned him. Somebody expected him to disappear quietly with the secrets he carried. Instead, somehow he survived. Long enough to bring somebody back. Mason stood slowly, calm expression returning. Familiar expression. The kind he wore before impossible missions. No, he said quietly. I think I finally understand why he found me. Outside, rain continued falling over Gray Harbor, while somewhere beyond fog and silence, the people protecting the town's secrets quietly realized something dangerous. The man they tried to scare away had stopped being afraid. 3 months later, Gray Harbor finally sounded different. Not louder exactly, just honest. Morning fog still drifted over the harbor like it always had. Fishing boats still moved slowly through cold Pacific water before sunrise. Wind still carried salt through narrow streets lined with old storefronts and tired buildings. But silence changed. The heavy kind disappeared, the kind built from fear. People looked each other in the eye again. Small conversations returned to sidewalks. Harbor workers stopped lowering their voices whenever sheriff vehicles passed. Because there were no sheriff vehicles anymore. Not the old kind, anyway. Federal investigators arrived quietly first. No sirens. No drama. Just questions nobody managed to avoid this time. Property records surfaced. Missing resident files reopened. Hidden transactions exposed years of carefully protected lies. Expensive waterfront homes sat strangely dark now, while court hearings replaced private dinners behind closed doors. Gray Harbor learned something painful. Secrets survive longest when good people grow too tired to ask questions. Mason Reeves watched most of it from a distance. Never liked crowds much. Never cared about headlines either. Some local paper called him a hero once. He quietly threw it away. Heroes felt louder than truth. Most mornings now started earlier than before. Small rental cabins still sat near the edge of town beneath pine trees overlooking gray ocean water. Except now the place finally sounded alive. Dog bowls near the kitchen. Paw prints permanently drying near the front porch. One chewed-up tennis ball somehow appearing in every room despite reasonable efforts to prevent it. Funny thing about healing. It sneaks in quietly, usually disguised as inconvenience. The German Shepherd slept near the fireplace now. Health finally returned fully. Stronger body. Fuller coat. Fear softer around the edges. Still cautious around strangers. Still watched roads carefully whenever unfamiliar vehicles passed. But no longer terrified. No longer running. Trust arrived slowly. Then stayed. Mason never officially named him anything else. Bandit somehow stuck. Mostly because the dog still occasionally stole socks without apology. One cold Saturday morning ocean mist rolled softly across the backyard. While Mason stood near the porch holding coffee, he actually remembered to finish for once. Bandit rested nearby watching gulls fight dramatically over absolutely nothing important. Calm morning. Peaceful morning. Then came the sound of tires on gravel. Mason turned instinctively. Old pickup truck. Mr. Franklin Tate stepped out carrying small wooden box beneath one arm. Slower these days. Lighter somehow too. Thought you might want this, the older man said quietly. Inside sat photographs. Dozens of them. Harper family pictures mostly. Birthdays. Fishing trips. Holiday mornings. Smiling faces finally returned to names people almost forgot. One photograph stopped Mason completely. Younger version of Bandit sitting proudly beside 2 laughing children near the harbor docks. Happy. Safe. Loved. Small note written carefully across the back. He always protected us. Mason looked quietly toward Bandit lying near the porch. Amber eyes calm now beneath soft morning sunlight. Funny thing about loyalty. Sometimes it survives things people never could. Guess you carried all of them with you, Mason said softly. Bandit walked over slowly then. Rested gently beside him. Same quiet movement from the very beginning. No words needed. Never really were. Weeks later, the town opened a small memorial near the harbor. Nothing dramatic. Just names. Flowers. A bench overlooking the ocean. Somebody placed a bronze German Shepherd statue near the entrance. Small plaque beneath it. For the ones who remembered when others forgot. Mason almost laughed quietly when he first saw it. You are getting famous, he muttered. Bandit ignored him professionally. Months passed. Rain returned. Winter softened again toward spring. And little by little, Gray Harbor became the kind of town people no longer whispered about. Not perfect. Never perfect. But honest. Honest felt close enough. One evening near sunset, Mason sat outside the cabin wrapped in cold ocean air, while orange light slipped softly across wet grass. Bandit rested near his boots. Relaxed now. Safe now. Somewhere beyond trees came the sound of distant harbor bells moving gently through wind. Mason looked out toward the horizon quietly. Funny how life changes. One rainy night, he almost drove away from a starving dog near a broken diner. Almost ignored him. Almost decided somebody else would help. Instead, somehow two abandoned souls found each other standing in cold rain, carrying different kinds of loneliness. Mason reached down absent-mindedly, scratching behind one familiar ear. "You saved more people than anybody knows," he said quietly. Bandit looked up once. Calm, steady, loyal as ever. Then rested his head lightly against Mason's leg the same way he always did when peace finally arrived. And somewhere beneath the fading light of a town learning how to tell the truth again, something quiet finally settled into place. Because sometimes the soul people abandon does not disappear. Sometimes it remembers exactly where the truth still lives.